Realize that the world is progressively moving towards agnosticism slash atheism. And there is absolutely nothing that the Christian world, the Muslim world, or any other religious world can do anything about it. It's too late. The deal is done. You allow for the internet. The global society has spoken. Let me tell you how we got there. You see, 12,000 years ago, when we were still somewhat into a stabilized hunter-gatherer situation, man began to believe in shamanism, that the trees, the air, everything has spirits. And so you had a common shaman who would speak to those spirits, usually on some hallucinogen. And then he would tell you about how to stay in communication with the earth, connection with the earth, and balance with the earth. But after a few thousand years, that began as agricultural settlements began to form, more permanent residents, that began to change and became what we call our polytheistic religions, where all of a sudden the sun is a god, the earth is a goddess, Mars is a goddess, a god, and Venus is a goddess, and there's a god of the wind and a god of the storm and a god of the waters. And that lasted for a few thousand more years. And then after a few thousand years of that, mythologies began. Well, now these gods of the planets and the gods of the storm now become anthropomorphized, and they become beings, and they have personalities, and they start having children, and everything becomes a god. And then they have to have their temples, and everything now requires worship, and man starts worshiping these gods. And so during this mythological age, we start to get our Enki, Enlil, Zeus, Ra, Olamare, Quetzalcoatl. We get all of our deities, our mythological deities. And man started thinking more deeply. And then we moved into another age of mysticism, where man started to understand and ask questions about what is his connection to all of this. And in trying to understand his connection to all of this, man started creating the more structured religions based on thought and philosophy, whether it was Buddhism, Hinduism, the Israelite religion of Judaism. All these other religions began to come more about of a philosophical thought process on how man connects to all these gods to which he's worshipped. And then the mystics of those religions started coming, because about 2,000 years after that, the structure of the church became, the structure of the temple, the mosque became too rigid. And so man started going on these journeys of trying to see higher levels of understanding within the structure of the church and structure of the organization. And so Christianity came about, Kabbalah grows, Islam grows, and has the different divergences of them all the mysticism happened, and that lasts for a few thousand years. And then after about 1,000 years plus of that, we start to get into a renaissance. Things are moving a little faster now, though. Before, we was going 3,000, 4,000, 2,000 years of separation before great changes would happen. But now, over just the course of 1,000 years, now we moved into a renaissance and a period of enlightenment, where people started going back to ancient wisdom and started thinking that maybe there is a idea of enlightenment through the connection of the mystics and the animism, shamanism, all of those things mixed together. And we come about with some type of mentality that connects us, and it is through the structure of the church. And that lasts for a while. But only a few hundred years later, from the Renaissance, man starts getting into a new age. And in that new age, man starts thinking that those old structures must be torn down, because they inhibit you from being able to see the powers of the mystics and the power of the animism and the power of the paganism. So now they're taking what was learned in the Renaissance and separating it from the structured organization of the church. But now we've moved in a couple of hundred years from that to where the structure of the church and even the mysticism, the animism, the spiritual, all those things are falling away. Science all along have been the underlining force that has given us facts over fiction, facts over dogma, and has shown us that this information is just truly falsified. That spirits causing the wind to blow? No. Tree spirits? No. It's not spirits, it is energy. Energy causes the wind to blow. Energy causes the trees to grow. That's rhymes. I didn't mean for that to rhyme. But energy is the creation of everything, and energy is within everything, and everything just transmutes from one energy form to the next energy form. And this is an eternal loop that has always been and always will be. There is nothing supernatural. Everything is but natural. So there is no God that can be proven through these religious ideas and these mystics ideas. So although I cannot prove that God doesn't exist, I cannot prove that God does exist. So therefore, I do not worship any God that I know that doesn't exist, because archaeology and our learning and understanding has shown that these gods of these old religions don't exist. But is there an actual God? We don't know. There's a yes and a no. We can't prove it, but we can't disprove it. So I'm not going to worship it. And even if it was God, then there is no reason for me to worship it, because if a God needed me to worship it, then that God has a need, and God cannot have a need. Not a true God can't have a need, can't have a desire, can't have wants, because then the needs, the desires, and the wants will be more powerful than that God. And so therefore, if something is more powerful than that God, then that God can't be God. As the Tao says, the moment you give it a name, it is no longer the way. So the moment you name a God, it is no longer God. So over the last 30, 40 years, atheism has been on the growth. Agnosticism has been on the growth. And one of the things that we can see is that in every country where the 15 to 34-year-olds are more atheist and agnostic, that those countries have higher levels of education, have higher qualities of life. That those countries with their higher education allows them access to the whole world. And because they have access to the whole world, they recognize that these old stories of fish swallowing people, these old stories of 10 plagues desolating a society, but yet there's no evidence of this desolation ever happening, is all false. That when it demonstrates to us that although these older scholars are saying that there must have been a historical Jesus, we recognize by gaining access to all the information that there is no one historical Jesus, that there may have been multiple people that the story was based off of, but that does not make it a one historical Jesus. So it just makes him purely a literary character. And the most beautiful thing that these new generations are starting to realize is that their higher quality of life is coming about because they release the stress, the anxiety of belonging to one of these religions. That these religions that constantly tell you that you're worthless, that you're not good enough, that you have to look outside yourself instead of inside yourself to find value in your existence. And they started realizing that I can find value. I create my own value. And if this is my only shot, I will make my value, and I will go and I will enjoy this life as much as I possibly can. It also makes what I said in the previous video. It makes a good person authentically good, and it makes an evil person authentically evil. Because you're not doing your good or your evil based on what a book tells you, what a structured religion tells you, then when you do good because your religion says take care of the poor and take care of the orphans, and you go and you take care of the poor and you take care of the orphans because your book tells you that that's what you should do, because if you're walking in the body of Christ, then you are acting like the body of Christ, and therefore your actions would dictate that. So your actions are that you take care of the widows and the orphans. It is all based on a condition that by being in the body of Christ, you get to go to heaven and avoid hell. So therefore it is conditional good. And if you're doing evil, it is conditional evil. When at least a person who's walked away from this can be free to have authentic good and authentic evil, to truly be their authentic self, which you're robbed of if you remain in these religions. If you believe these religions, you are robbed of ever becoming your authentic self. You are constantly told who you should be, how you should dress, how you should act, what kind of husband, what kind of wife, what kind of child, when you should show up, which ritual you should participate in. You are a robot, an automaton. But if you want to be free of that, like so many are, and so many will continue to be, because the growth is phenomenal, and you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey. Good vibrations.